This is the component 2 in-class question book, question 12. And a fishy question. Grand Banks is an area of the sea off Canada, and we're introduced to the cod, just a fish in fish and chips. Cod was fished heavily for about 50 years, and 60% of the total population was harvested annually, so a lot of fish were taken out. And eventually they stopped fishing when the population was less than 1%. So it's got down to a very small population. Other bits of information we need. So we had lots of fishing. Cod grow evenly throughout their life. And eventually, this is a key bit of information, the cod that remained were much smaller and grew more slowly. So that's what we've ended up with. We've got a graph that shows time on the bottom and median age at maturity. So maturity, where they can reproduce and being an adult, and we've got a trend there. So the trend is a negative correlation. Let's look at the jobs that we need to do. In these essays, you're always looking for which is the bit of information from my notes I'm going to give, and then what's the bit of information from the blurb that I'm given that I need to interpret, and then possibly up to 3 areas of knowledge that you're thinking about. So knowledge of evolution. That's our knowledge, and so let's just think about evolution. So we have got. We got other stories of kind of in the revision notes as salamanders and other examples with snails and things like that. But they're all basically the same story of you've got a population and there is variation in that population, and that is due to originally mutations. And then you have got the environmental conditions, and then depending on those conditions, some of the population will be at a selective advantage or indeed a disadvantage, and they will then breed successfully and now pass on their advantageous alleles, and so the allele frequency will increase over the subsequent populations. So that's one area, the kind of evolution that you're gonna talk about, and possibly another area. Population very low. Population was very low. So other areas that you can think of where population area are things like founders effect, genetic bottlenecks, things like that. So starting off from a very low population. So another area might be genetic drift in low populations. So genetic drift in low populations. So those are sort of the areas that you're going to need from your notes, and you just need to relate it to what we've got here. So we have got in 1959 cod didn't reproduce on average until they were about 6 6 years old. And then we've got slow rate of growth, so we've got large fish that have grown slowly throughout their lives who are reproducing, and that's the average, the average size and age for those, very large. Okay, and then we've got a period of heavy fishing. In this heavy fishing, after 1959, what's being caught? So we've got the large fish are being caught. So our small fish on this side, they are at the selective advantage. So smaller cod will survive. There might be mutations that enable some of these smaller fish to reproduce. So any small fish or reproducing small fish, those are the ones that are at the most advantage. So they've got the selective advantage, they're reproducing smaller fish. And so, over time, these will breed, presumably with other reproducing small fish, and this allele for reproducing when you're small, or even for slower growth. So another advantage there, I've got to spell slower growth. So if you've got a fish that can grow slowly, matures whilst it's small, that's where the selective advantage is here. Or even reproducing at a younger age. Reproduce at a younger age. These are all ideas that you can come up with for what's going to be present at the end of this fishing time. So smaller fish, grow slowly, reproduce at a younger age, those sorts of ideas for where the advantage is. And so by the end down here, we've got very little of our larger fish. And let me just have a look. So perhaps towards the end, we're thinking about, we've got this population of less than 1%, and we can suggest that these, we become kind of isolated. The genetic drift would occur in these, so you get mutations and changes within these, and so that population would not really recover back to being full-size fish again. So those are the sort of ideas that we're wanting to get in the upper bands. You've got to clearly explain the link between the age of the cod, the reproductive age, and the length and the advantage of these smaller cod when being fished. You've got to really mention mutations and what they could do. Particularly, if you mentioned a variation in reproductive age due to a mutation and size, and how that would lead to changes in the gene pool. The advantage of the alleles for reproducing when smaller. So if you can reproduce at a younger age or reproducing at smaller whilst you are a small fish and passing on those advantageous alleles, you've got to make that clear. You can mention genetic drift and the lack of recovery of the population. So down here you've got a very low population and 1% left. And the last bit of information here, the cod that remained when fishing was finally closed were small and grew more slowly than lived in the Grand Bank several decades previously. So these smaller fish are still surviving. Presumably today there's still quite a lot of, the population is smaller than it previously was before fishing started. So this idea of genetic drift, so even now the population is probably smaller and reproduce at a younger age. So this population hasn't magically changed back to the population that it was at the start, before the fishing. All of these examples, you've got to try and pull in the information that you've got here from the text where we've highlighted it, or from the graph. And they're wanting, for 9, they're wanting articulate account, integrated, where you are producing this sort of seamless story with your, talking about evolution, talking about genetic drift, and then bringing in the examples from the graph. You've got to use scientific conventions and vocabulary appropriately, and no irrelevant inclusions or significant omissions to get in this top band. Good luck with that.